This is Judy from Bungalow Quilting and Yarn. I'm going to do a primer on paper piecing today because a lot of people come into the shop and they say, oh, I don't like paper piecing, and that's fine because I don't like hand applique. So I think that everybody has the thing that they like and they don't like, but I want to show you how you can achieve effects like this that you can't achieve in any other way other than paper piecing. It kind of replaces and speeds up the process of blocks like this if you want something very detailed and particular that you would otherwise have to probably applique, because you couldn't get something like this otherwise. So paper piecing is something that's been around for a long time, and if you can count, you can paper piece. I gave my son strict instructions while he's filming me not to film the rest of my sewing room since it's pretty messy because I've got fabric everywhere. So paper piecing, a typical pattern will look like this, and I'm going to show you something simple to start with, because there are more complicated patterns, but you have to start with something simple. Here's actually the most simple form of a paper piecing pattern, where you would start on number 1, sew on the line between 1 and 2, and follow the numbered sequences. And most of the time your patterns should have a 1/4 inch seam allowance, that your fabric should overlap that 1/4 inch seam allowance, because if your fabric only comes right to that edge, it's not going to be enough to sew it together to another block. So that's what that outline on the outside means. That's the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Alright, so the simpler block, one of the simpler blocks is something like this. Now, when you see a piece like this, and it's outlined once again by the 1/4 inch seam allowance, it's meant that you're going to join this to this. That's why it says A1, A2, A3, A4, and then these are B1, B2, B3, B4. And your book, or wherever you're getting these from, should have the instructions where they tell you, what that means. These are simple ones that I downloaded off the computer. So something like this has 2 pieces. So you're going to keep a paper scissors next to your sewing machine, because you don't want to use your good sewing scissors to be cutting these pieces of paper apart. So you have to have 2 scissors in this process, one for paper and one for fabric. So now I'm going to start showing you exactly how paper piecing is done. I've got these little solid pieces cut, and I've pre-cut them for convenience of filming, but you can just have any kind of scrap available to you. Here's A1. So it helps to have a lamp behind or a light source behind your work. You actually sew on the printed side and you lay the fabric on the opposite side. So it's kind of a backwards process. So if you have a light source that you can put behind your work, it helps a great deal. So you're going to put a piece of fabric that's big enough to cover A1 behind it, okay? So don't worry about straight of grain. Just put the piece behind A1. Now you want to make sure that you've got enough to cover it. You can put your light source there so you can see, yep, all my corners are covered. Everything is covered by that. All right. So then you're going to sew on the line between A1 and A2. So it's just like crazy quilting. It's a flip and stitch and flip kind of process. So here's the line between A1 and A2. I'm going to put another piece of fabric back there. And now I'm going to sew on that line. I'm going to put them right sides together so that when I flip this out, it covers A2. Okay? So what you're going to do with your sewing machine now, if Peter can focus in on the sewing machine, is you're going to put your stitches so that they're smaller. You want a very small stitch. And the reason you want a really small stitch is because the more times that needle perforates the paper, the easier it is to tear that paper. If you have big, long stitches, you're not perforating your paper very often. So I'm sewing along the line between A1 and A2, and then you extend your sewing out into that 1/4 inch seam so that you're not cutting it too short. So go ahead and extend your sewing out across there. That won't hurt. So then you flip it over and you trim. Trim, trim, trim. Okay. There is a nice seam allowance. I'm going to fold it over, and I'm going to use my light source again to make sure that I did cover between A1 and A2. And I did. I covered A2. Okay. Another way that you can check to make sure your fabric is going to cover. Let's go back to where I put them right sides together here. You can take A2 and you can fold it down like this. And you can see where the edge of A2 is. When you fold it down onto this piece of fabric that I put right sides together, if that covers it, you know you're good, because eventually this is going to get flipped up like that. Okay, and we'll cover that again. Now we're going to sew between A2 and A3. So now I'm going to take another piece of fabric. I'm going to take this bright green piece and I'm going to put it on, and you can use your light source again. See that? Look how you can use your light source to see where your line is. So here's the fabric so that I've got plenty of room. I'm not shorting it. I'm going to sew between A2 and A3 on that line. All right. Again, I crossed over a little bit. Crossed over into that seam allowance. Now I'm going to flip it over, trim it. And some people say that it wastes fabric. Well, it kind of does, but it's no worse than any of those other techniques that some of the TV quilters use where they are cutting strips and toss it. You're going to save a lot of those little pieces anyways for other paper piecing projects. Okay, so now let's see. Look, you can see that everything is covered when you look through your light source, that's covered. Okay, so, and you've got this nice pattern developing here. Okay, so the last one, A3 to A4. And I'm going to take this other kind of odd shaped yellow, odd colored yellow. Now let's say I didn't know if A4 was an odd shape. Let's say it was an odd shape and I didn't know if this was going to cover it. So I'm looking here and I can see in my light source that I'm on that line and I'm well above that line so that I can sew on there without knowing that I'm not going to run off the edge. But I'm also going to pull this one down on that line. I'm going to fold it down on that line. And yep, that is big enough. This piece is big enough because here's the end of A4. It's extending down and so is the yellow piece. So we know we've got plenty of room. Once I flip that up, it's going to cover it. It's not going to be too short. So I'm going to sew, oops, I dropped it. Put it back. We have my daughter's yellow lab puppy here today, and we call her the White Tornado. Okay, so now we're going to stitch on that line. Oh, I ran out of bobbin thread. But anyway, so you stitch on that line and you would flip this up. Okay, so now, again, you've got this nice organization working here. So what you're going to do then is you can actually trim your fabric. Now, this is where it gets dicey because you have to decide, am I going to use my fabric scissors or am I going to use my paper scissors? I guess I'm going to use my paper scissors. So you're going to trim it like this. And you're going to trim on that 1/4 inch. See, so now it's just like a regular quilt block. You're going to trim on that 1/4 inch and then you're ready to join it to the pieces with B. So you do the exact same thing on B. And then you're going to line up your corners. Put a pin through there. Let's pretend that I have already sewn on B all my pieces of fabric. And I'm going to trim this off here. I'm going to trim this. Sometimes it's hard with paper scissors because they're duller. Okay, so there's my piece. Oops, I'm going to trim this side too yet. Okay, so there's my piece. Now I ran out of bobbin thread there. There we go. And when you go to put it together with B, let's say B was already done and I had trimmed it all up. Then you're going to put those right sides together and you're going to stick a pin through there. You're going to stick a pin through that corner there, because that's your stitching line right here. This is where you're joining the A's to B's. And then you see that corner there? Put a pin in there. Put that same pin through there. Line them up. Then you know that your pieces are right together. So then you stitch on that line, flip it up, and that's how you'll have your finished block. And that's how simple it is.